No, come on, man.
I don't like him. I don't like that offense.
Oh, 100%.
I like Kirk Cousins. I'll fight everyone on this.
He's one of these guys that I'm a big believer in.
Who would we have ranked higher right now?
Are you serious? You don't actually believe that. Hey everyone, welcome into the FantasyPros Football Podcast. I'm your host, Bobby Sylvester, joined as always by Mike Tagliere. Give us a follow on Twitter if you don't already. We're at Bobby Fantasy Pro and at Mike Tagliere NFL. Tags, what's going on, dude?
Oh, nothing much. Just about ready to talk to one of my favorite guys in the industry that we're having on today. Him and I have talked through the years. We've actually met in person, and he's one of the sharpest guys out there. So, I always love having some guests like him on the show. So, sometimes I learn things because, like all of us, we only have so much time in a day, and there's some things that we're absolutely going to miss, and I always tend to learn something from this individual.
Absolutely. It's JJ Zachariason, editor-in-chief at FanDuel and Numberfire. He's on Twitter at Late Round QB. He actually wrote the book on late round quarterbacks. JJ, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for the kind words, too. I really, really do appreciate that.
Absolutely. Yeah, we definitely mean them. Every time you come on, it always makes for a fun show. I mean, I don't know about the people listening, but I have a blast. So here's what we're going to be talking about today, guys. We got best value picks in the middle rounds. We're going to be talking, each of us has one guy from round 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 that we're going to be sharing as our favorite value picks. First, though, I want to tell you about our draft assistant with Sync, which can be found at fantasypros.com/draftwizard. Basically, here's how it works, okay? It can sync with your draft and offer pick suggestions and the percentage odds any player is going to be taken before your next pick, along with so much other valuable expert advice. We've got a co-pilot feature, which allows you to draft straight from the draft assistant for NFL.com and ESPN drafts. Plus, it's a sleek layout, super easy to use. It's the same interface as our draft simulator, which you've surely used. We support all kinds of leagues from all kinds of commissioner sites like ESPN, NFL.com, Yahoo, CBS Sports, and Sleeper, among many others. Crush your draft with our draft assistant at fantasypros.com/draftwizard. Again, that's fantasypros.com/draftwizard. Now, keep in mind, that's only MVP and Hall of Fame subscribers can use Draft Assistant with Sync. If you're not already an MVP and Hall of Fame subscriber, then listen up. We've got a special offer going on right now for 6 months of our Hall of Fame package. It's a $65 value in our highest subscription tier. And if you want to redeem this offer, check out fantasypros.com/offers for more details. Again, that's fantasypros.com/offers. All right, guys, let's start this off. And JJ, we're going to let you go first. Round 4, who's your favorite value from this round ADP 49 through 60?
So I cheated a little bit. So round 4 is 37 to 48, right? That's the
Yeah, it is, and I'm apparently outing myself as someone who's awful at math. What is wrong with me?
I wanted to be sure because I kind of cheated and I went with the number 37 guy on this, and it's I don't always just want to go with the the most costly guy, because obviously that player is better inherently. But DJ Moore was listed at 37 overall in the ADP list, and that's the player that I wanted to talk about. I mean, I understand the concerns with Moore and a new offense. There's a new system, a new quarterback. There's a lot of question marks and ambiguity around that situation. But Moore has been a stud to start his career. He posted almost 1,200 yards last year with horrific quarterback play. He did only score 4 times. That had to do partially because of that quarterback play, but he also, I think that we should have maybe some concern or some hesitation about that touchdown ceiling, because what we saw last year is that he was only targeted in the end zone 6 times, and that's usually a number that's indicative of how well a player is going to do in the touchdown column. So I do think that there's at least some concern there, but there's enough volume in his favor and potential volume in his favor to outweigh that, especially, if you look at the Panthers defense, could easily be the worst defense in the league this year. I don't think anyone would be shocked if that happens, especially in that division and who they're going to be facing 6 times this season. So they should be playing from behind. That's going to be beneficial for the passing volume in that offense. And then the system in general could also be beneficial from a passing offense standpoint. So I look at DJ Moore. I think he's a fairly safe bet given what we've seen from him. Should have a high floor, but I do think that with the changes, and sort of that variance, we don't know what that ceiling could necessarily look like, and it could be pretty high.
Wide receiver 15 right now in terms of ADP. So would you take him ahead of guys like Adam Thielen, Odell Beckham, Cooper Kupp, AJ Brown, Allen Robinson?
Yeah, so I have him right now ahead of those guys, but I think that he's in the same tier. I can make a case for all of them. I would say, of those guys that you just named, A.J. Brown, I think, is in like the next tier only because of the volume concerns I have, but I wouldn't be shocked at all if A.J. Brown ends up having a monster season because he's a freak. Sure. I mean, I think he's sort of in that tier in general with those players, but I do have him ranked. I think I have him at like wide receiver 10 or something right now.
All right, Tex, who are you going with? And it's okay if we have, the same players.
Yeah, no, I actually prepared like 2 names for every single round just to make sure that I gave some variety on this one. And, so I did not go with DJ Moore because my favorite in this one is actually Calvin Ridley. Calvin Ridley and him are side by side actually for me in terms of like what I'm expecting from them. I think they're both fantastic wide receivers. Ridley was the one I was higher on coming out of college, obviously landed in the better offense. There's some question marks around DJ Moore and not being able to practice with someone like Teddy Bridgewater getting on the same page. Now, does it help that DJ Moore is more of a possession style receiver? Absolutely. The only thing I do worry about with Moore a little bit in terms of target shares, because obviously you have McCaffrey there, Curtis Samuel, they're going to manufacture some touches for him. And then you have Robbie Anderson, who obviously played under Matt Rule at Temple. So I don't know if there was a reason they went out and got him. But DJ Moore and Calvin Ridley were 2 highlights, like 2 superstars in the article that went up today. It's boom, bust, and everything in between. And fun fact, the only players who had higher wide receiver 2 or better percentage rates than those 2 receivers were Michael Thomas, DeAndre Hopkins, Julio Jones, Devontae Adams, Allen Robinson, and Julian Edelman. Now, Edelman is a weird one that it fits in there, but Calvin Ridley and DJ Moore were the next guys on that list. They both performed as a wide receiver 2 or better in 60+% of their games. And then to know that, so the reason that I have Calvin Ridley higher than DJ Moore is because Moore is going to have more competition on the roster. They may take a step back in pass attempts. Usually under a new head coach, they do tend to take a more conservative approach, but that defense, as JJ mentioned, is pretty terrible. Ridley, on the other hand, they lost Austin Hooper. They replaced him with Hayden Hurst, who I absolutely love, but I'm not going to sit here and pretend that Hayden Hurst is going to walk into the 100+ targets that Austin Hooper was on pace for. They never replaced Mohamed Sanu. That was a guy getting in the high 90s targets per year. Even last year when he was traded away, he was on pace, I think, for 96 targets. So they never really replaced those. Julio Jones, now 31 years old, obviously getting to the apex of his career, he might start that turn down as we get closer. I mean, he's 6'3", 230 pounds. You can't move the way he does forever. Calvin Ridley going into his third year in the NFL. Under Dirk Cutter, they average a lot of pass attempts there in Atlanta. Been top 7 every single year he's been there as a coordinator, which is 4 different seasons. So there's just really no reason not to like Calvin Ridley. But I dig JJ's pick too of DJ Moore. It's just Calvin Ridley's a little bit cheaper. Not much, but a little bit cheaper.
I thought about saying Calvin Ridley. I like Keenan Allen a little bit better, but I'm actually going to go with Ridley's teammate, Todd Gurley, so we can mix in a running back here. Right now, he's ADP 19 for running backs, and he finished number 14 last year behind a much lesser offensive line, a much lesser offense. We've talked about him being injury prone, but is he really injury prone when he's only missed, a handful of games through his 5-year career? Only second to Frank Gore and Latavius Murray in the last 5 seasons. Yeah, he's going to be dealing with the injury, but he was dealing with the injury in 2017 when he was the RB1, 2018 when he was the RB1. Just what happens with your knees. And look, he was fine again last season in that horrible offense, scoring 14 touchdowns. We know he can catch a lot more than the 31 balls he saw last year. I think he's got no competition for targets. He's going to get more work this year. And he's going, again, ADP 19? He's going to be better than he was last year, right, guys?
Backs, yeah. You're getting him discount for the injury because if he stays healthy for all 16 games, I don't think there's any doubt that he's going to finish as a top 15 running back.
Sure.
Now, I want to circle back and I want to ask JJ about a player that you mentioned that legit I would have said is one of the worst values in this round is Keenan Allen. I am sad to say that I will own 0 Keenan Allen this year, and not because he's not a good football player. He's actually one of my favorite wide receivers to watch. But there's a lot of things going wrong there for me to like him with LA. JJ, how do you feel about Keenan Allen? Where is he in your wide receiver rankings? Like, do you share some of my concerns or do you think like Bobby in that he's a value here the end of the 4th round?
Yeah, someone asked the question on my mailbag episode last week on my podcast about, what's the real difference between Allen Robinson and Keenan Allen? And then he spit out a bunch of numbers from last year, and then there's the bad quarterback situation, et cetera, et cetera. And really my answer back was that because I have a gap between Allen Robinson and Keenan Allen. We've seen Allen Robinson produce with bad quarterback play. We don't know what Keenan Allen is going to do without Phillip Rivers. So there's this big question mark around that offense. And like you, Tags, I'm not very bullish on this offense in general. I have the same sort of concerns with like an Austin Eckler in the offense and what that's all going to look like. I think that the fantasy community just seems to be looking at sort of the upper bound of range of outcomes with this Chargers offense when it really could hypothetically go south. So I'm with you. Of the guys we're talking about and of the guys in this round, I definitely like a lot of the other wide receivers more than Allen. And I think as a result, I'm just not going to be drafting him.
I'll push back just a little bit. The thing with Keenan Allen is, is he going to go backwards? I think it's almost certain. We're talking about someone over the last 3 years has been the wide receiver 4 behind Julio Jones, Michael Thomas, and DeAndre Hopkins. He's been exceptional. So how far is he going to drop? Is he going to drop from wide receiver top 10-ish to outside the top 20 wide receivers? Because he's going ADP wide receiver 19 right now.
I'd say yeah, because if you look at the last 6 years, the Chargers have topped 573 pass attempts in 5 of those 6 years. So the pass attempts were obviously of the higher caliber. They were over league average. Tyrod Taylor has never thrown the ball more than 437 times in a season. And then even if they go to Justin Herbert, it's not like they're going to have a rookie dropping back 40 times a game to pass. So if that number goes to, let's even be bullish on it. Let's say 475. You're taking off 100 pass attempts off this offense. They're obviously going to incorporate Austin Eckler. Mike Williams is still there to get some targets. Hunter Henry's being drafted as a top 6 tight end for whatever reason. So there's just a lot of concerns. And again, I love Keenan Allen as a player, and he's not wrong about, I actually think he's a better football player than Mike Evans in terms of what he said on Twitter the other day. He is a better football player, in my opinion, than Mike Evans, but that doesn't mean I'm going to draft him in fantasy football as high as he should go with a good quarterback.
Now we're going to wide receiver. Now we're going to ADP 49 to 60. This is the 5th round. JJ, you're first again. Which one are you going with?
I'm going to go with Tyler Lockett. So, through week 10 last year, he had that injury in week 10, that leg injury where there were a lot of weird question marks around what was going on there because he was in the hospital and stuff. But he was averaging a 22.7% target share per game rate up through that point. He was averaging 17.7 PPR points per game. But then from then until the end of the year, that target share dropped by about 3 percentage points. He didn't look the same. His PPR points per game rate also dropped by 8 points. And there, usually when I look at splits like that, I at least want to find a reason and something tangible that I can say this is the reason that this happened. Sure, you can point to the fact that DK Metcalf was a rookie and he developed, etc. But I do think that the injury had something to do with Tyler Lockett's drop there. And so, I think that's a big reason why there's a discount here right now too. And then the other thing that I like about Seahawks wide receivers is that number one, we're looking at them from the standpoint, projecting them from the standpoint of it being a fairly conservative offense in terms of overall pass volume. What happens in a scenario, I like to look at range of outcomes when I'm looking at players, but what happens in a scenario where the Seahawks wake up and realize they have Russell Wilson and they want to throw the ball more? What happens in a scenario where the Seahawks see more negative game scripts and all of a sudden, that 22-23% target share that Tyler Lockett was seeing becomes a lot even more valuable, not only because he's catching passes from Russell Wilson, but because it's on a bigger pie, right? And there's more passing volume being thrown around. And then on top of that, with those wide receivers, another great piece of having, or another great reason to have a piece of a Russell Wilson offense in terms of the wide receivers is that he always targets his wide receivers in the end zone. Last year, DK Metcalf led the league in end zone targets. Tyler Lockett was tied for 4th in that category. And again, just to reiterate with what I said about DJ Moore, that's something that we should be paying attention to because that usually has a strong correlation to touchdown scoring. So I think Tyler Lockett is the right kind of value play. And I do think that he has both a floor and a ceiling.
Tags, I know you're going with Robert Woods, aren't you? You like Woods more than Lockett, don't you?
They're both in the same tier for me. I think Woods is the safer pick, whereas Lockett might have a little bit more upside if he can stay on the field. I had 2 players for this one. Robert Woods was definitely one of them, and I like Lockett. Bobby, I want you to tell JJ why you're a little bit low on Lockett, because you and I were supposed to have like a rankings debate on him. I don't think we ever finished that. I think one of us went on vacation and we just never finished it. But, I'm higher on Lockett. Like, you could look at that slot position and say, there's no way that he can keep up with that efficiency. He can't do it. And we said the same thing about Doug Baldwin, and it keeps happening. And it happens with every Seahawks receiver because Russell Wilson is just really friggin' good at football.
Yes, he is.
And he creates fantasy wide receivers. Now, is it going to be a little bit more touchdown reliant than we're used to? Sure. But at the same time, again, if Lockett's healthy, there's outside of him and Metcalf, there's really no other pass catchers. Greg Olsen, I'm not worried about.
Yeah.
I don't have a big problem with Tyler Lockett. I just really like DK Metcalf, and there's a couple other guys behind him that I like a fair amount more. DJ Chark was exceptional. He was the number 5 wide receiver before his injury in Week 11 last year. Robert Woods, who was excellent as well at the end of the last season. Stephon Diggs has always been a top 15 wide receiver when he's been on the field. Now he goes to Buffalo where he's got less competition for targets. He's not dealing with Adam Thielen. He maybe has a quarterback who's more inclined to throw, well, we know he's more inclined to throw deeper down the field than Kirk Cousins. Devontae Parker was the number 2 fantasy football wide receiver after Preston Williams got hurt. Terry McLaurin has no competition for targets. So it's not so much that I hate Tyler Lockett. There's just a couple other guys in this range I'm more excited about.
That's fair. As you mentioned, Robert Woods is definitely a good one that you can go to. He's about the safest wide receiver 2 that you could have in fantasy football. To know that he scored just twice last year. He had 2 receiving touchdowns, and that he finished, as one of the better wide receiver, like in terms of consistency of what he did for your lineup. He was a wide receiver 2 or better. It was 53.5% of the time. So basically, he's someone that you can rely on for consistent production. Is the ceiling there that maybe he's never going to be like a top 6 wide receiver, because I don't think he's ever scored more than 6 receiving touchdowns, but he's very consistent. That's why I say wide receiver 2. But another name I want to mention is Jonathan Taylor. I think he's an amazing value in the 5th round. You just don't draft someone like Jonathan Taylor with miles on him and say, "Oh, we're gonna share his workload with Marlon Mack during his most valuable years, his rookie contract." It makes absolutely zero sense. He's basically like a Nick Chubb behind a better offensive line. So yeah, Jonathan Taylor in the 5th round. I think a lot of people are going to look back and say, "Why didn't he go higher again?"
Yeah, the offensive line's incredible with Jonathan Taylor. JJ, what do you think about him this year?
Yeah, it's funny because before the Damian Williams opt-out happened, I actually thought that Jonathan Taylor had the clearest or most likely path to being sort of a workhorse this year. Now, obviously, there's a little bit of a change there with CEH, but I still think that Taylor has that ability. I mean, people are off of the rookie running backs, not just because of the ramp up to the season not being normal, but on top of that, all of these guys going to these backfields that are crowded in some way. But I would argue pretty strongly that of those backfields that these players are going into, what Jonathan Taylor is walking into was the easiest to overcome, I would argue, of the main rookie running backs that we're talking about. I'm just not, I don't think Marlon Mack is a special talent. People talk about Nyheim Hines as the pass catcher there. He's fine. I don't think Nyheim Hines is a terrible player, but Jonathan Taylor has a real opportunity to be special, and he was someone that really popped in my prospect model. Anyone who does analytical scouting, they would say the exact same. And then I saw that picture of him looking like a linebacker the other day, and
yes.
I am now all in on Jonathan Taylor.
I thought about going Jonathan Taylor. I couldn't decide between him and DJ Chark. So since you picked Taylor, I'll go with DJ Chark. I already mentioned he was a top 6 wide receiver in the first 10 weeks of the season. And then he dealt with the injury. He's excellent with Gardner Minshew. And we talk about Carolina and DJ Moore, how much they're going to have to pass. There's no team worse in the NFL right now than the Jacksonville Jaguars, so they're going to have to pass the ball, I would assume, 580 plus times. And who's going to get not the majority of those targets, but who's going to get the lion's share of those targets? It's DJ Chark. I'm excited to see what he does in his 3rd year. What do you think, JJ?
Yeah, I mean, he's got the formula. I mean, if you want to look at just like an A-dot and end zone targets and guys who are targeted in the red zone, he's got that. I think the biggest concern, obviously, is what we're going to see out of Minshew and what we're going to see from the passing offense in general. But I'm in on Chark. I think he's a strong value. I will say too, since we're talking about all these wide receivers, I'm currently putting together a players to avoid article, and I don't remember a season seeing such an efficient market at the wide receiver position where there aren't these like glaring, you need to avoid this guy at the wide receiver position specifically. I can point a lot of running backs, but at the wide receiver position, there's just so many good players, and it's really hard to find guys to just fade at their ADP.
Yeah. All right, let's go to the next round here. We are now into the 6th round. ADP 61 overall to 72. JJ, you're first again.
Yeah, so I'll just continue the wide receiver talk. Terry McLaurin is my go-to here. I wasn't super into him as a prospect. Mostly, again, I have a prospect model where I'm looking at data, and he was not very productive in college, but, he balled out last year. There's no doubt about it. I generally try to target players in general in good offenses, but some of the research I've done shows that that's more important at running back than is a wide receiver, at least. But there are definitely concerns about Dwayne Haskins. But McLaurin should really walk into a lot of volume. Last year he only saw 93 targets with a 20% target share. But Washington last season ran the second fewest plays of any team since 2011. So, they were methodical and annoying last season offensively. There's a regime change, so hopefully that changes a little bit. And there's almost zero chance that they're going to see as few plays as that, because it's generally a number that regresses to the mean. So I have him for over 120 targets, and in that range, given what we saw last year. He beat up some good cornerbacks last year too as a rookie. I'm in on Terry McLaurin.
I love Terry McLaurin. Now, he's not my call here, but I'm going to have a ton of shares of Terry McLaurin. Tags, I haven't heard you talk about him very much. Is it just the offense that you want to avoid?
Yeah, I think I talked about, I want to say I talked about it with you and who the heck was it that Andy Behrens. We had him on,
right?
And you guys were talking about a whole bunch of wide receivers from bad offenses.
We agreed on everybody, man. Yeah. Andy's my best friend.
Yeah, that's my only issue with Terry McLaurin. It has nothing to do with the player. It has everything to do with his quarterback situation. And we don't know if Dwayne Haskins is going to take a step forward. There's a lot of uncertainty, kind of like Mitch Trubisky when he came in, and understanding that these quarterbacks had very, very limited experience in college, and you figure that there was going to be some growing pains. Now, what we saw as the year progressed from Haskins was he did progress as the year went on, but obviously now a new offense. I really don't know what to expect from this team. There's just so much uncertainty surrounding him that it's, again, one of these things, and it's such a cop-out too, and I hate saying it, is that saying a player's a good football team, but if you can't be ignorant to the fact that he plays for a bad offense and a bad football team. I know he did last year too, and I think that's why he dealt with some of the inconsistencies that he did, and right. I think a lot of teams coming into this year are going to look at him a lot different, right? You go back to last year, and it's like, there was no shadow cornerbacks falling around Terry McLaurin for the first half of the year.
True.
So who's this guy? And then all of a sudden, he made a name for himself, and now he has that target on his back, and there's really nobody else in this offense that you really have to concern yourself with. I guess Antonio Gibson, some people are saying that, but that's my concern with him. And I do think he's a value in this round. However, there is no way. This is the only round, by the way, that I put one name down, because if somebody stole it, I wasn't going to give it to them anyway. AJ Green is mine. He's all mine.
Yeah.
And find someone that loves you the way that I love AJ Green. That's basically where I'm leaving this.
Where do you have him ranked? Because right now in ADP, he's wide receiver 28.
He's moving up then, because I think he was down at 31 not too long ago. I have him at wide receiver 23.
Okay.
And that's me being cautious. When I go through my projections, when I get to a team that I'm looking at it and I'm way higher than everybody else, I'm I need to go back and be cautious about this. And I was very temperamental, in terms of lowering my expectations for the Bengals offense overall. And I still have AJ Green at wide receiver 23. If you were guaranteed AJ Green was going to play all 16 games, I think there's no question he'd be drafted as a top 15 wide receiver. And obviously those concerns are there, but the guys that are being drafted over him, they're just very low upside options. It's why aren't you chasing a guy that's been dominant throughout his career when he's on the field? And now he has the best quarterback that he's ever had. So AJ Green is going to be on a lot of my fantasy teams. He already is on a lot of them. And it's a never-ending tweet thing. Whenever I tweet out a team that I drafted and they see AJ Green, that's where I got that from. People are like, don't ever let your love for AJ Green go. So I won't.
JJ, I got to get your take on AJ Green. Do you agree with Tags that he's a nice value here?
Yeah, I mean, look, so I'm probably not as bullish as Tags. It sounds like Tags is borderline ready to propose to the man. But,
yeah.
I mean, look, I get it. Last year I was in on AJ Green before the injury happened, and so I understand the upside that's there. I think I have him about at ADP, just because of the concerns of him not playing for a while. There's a rookie quarterback stepping in where I would agree it should be an upgrade, but there's still at least some question marks there. So that's really, obviously there's injury concerns, but I get it. Once you get to that point in your draft, once you get to past round 5 and you're into round 6, you really should be shooting for upside throughout your draft. But at that point, you really don't even really need to worry about the floor that much in most formats, just given what we see with opportunity costs in that area of the draft. So I get it. I do think that he has the right kind of upside.
I want you guys to imagine something really quick. Imagine a year ago today that someone would tell you Devontae Parker and AJ Green are healthy going into the season, but Devontae Parker's going before AJ Green. You'd want to punch him in the face, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and I liked Devontae Parker, but not over AJ Green.
Parker was our biggest hit last year, man. Every time you bring him up, it brings a smile to my face. Hopefully some of our later round guys can break out like Devontae Parker. My guy, Tags, you know who it is. Everyone listening to the podcast, unless you're a brand new listener, knows who it is. JJ, I'm curious to get your take on Raheem Mostert, and then I'll give my analysis.
Man, I'm actually on the opposite side of the spectrum with Mostert.
Okay, good. Our listeners need to hear this. They need to hear an opposite perspective.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with people disagreeing about stuff. My thing with Mostert is last year he was super touchdown dependent. We saw him basically have that fantasy floor week in and week out because of the touchdowns and because of what we saw there. And then also, he hasn't been that much of a pass catcher. Last year he averaged per game target share of 6.8%. And then over the stretch where that's when he basically started seeing more snaps in that offense, more than 50% of the team's snaps week in and week out. And then during that stretch where he was seeing that, which was week 13 on, he didn't hit a double-digit percentage target share in any of those games. He only had 1.8 targets per contest. If you look at history, we've only seen 5 running backs in the top 10 in season-long PPR with a sub 7% target share since 2011. To me with Mostert, if you really want to hit that upside, you're sort of hoping for like a Derrick Henry-esque type season. And maybe that happens, and maybe you're bullish on Raheem Mostert seeing more volume through the air, which is certainly possible. But I think the main reason that I'm sort of off is because of what they did in the playoffs. Because I feel like people forget about the divisional round when Tevin Coleman was the starter in that game. He had 22 rush attempts. Raheem Mostert had 12. And then Tevin Coleman hurts his shoulder in the NFC Championship game. And that's when Raheem Mostert really came in and became the workhorse again.
29 carries, baby.
Yeah, and he just went
here's the
bonkers.
thing. They signed him to a contract. They improved his contract. So doesn't that indicate that he's probably the starter?
I think that Raheem Mostert is the better bet between him and Tevin Coleman. And I'm not even that big of a Tevin Coleman fan as a player.
Sure.
I think that Kyle Shanahan likes Tevin Coleman almost more than anyone outside of Tevin Coleman's family. So I think that that's important, and that's something to keep in mind. But Tevin Coleman, if you look at his target shares per game, they were much more consistent, a lot higher than what we saw with Raheem Mostert. And I buy into the pass catching ceiling more for these running backs than I do the rushing floor. So to me, Mostert's someone who I think can hit ADP and maybe slightly exceed where he's being drafted because they should see a decent amount of rushing scores. They still should be fairly run heavy. I just worry about where that ceiling is going to hit if he doesn't, improve in the receiving department.
Yeah, so Tags, we already know what you think about Mostert as well, but I'm just going to share this stat again because I haven't shared it in probably 6 weeks, so a lot of you guys probably have not heard it, but this is the most fantasy points over any 8-week stretch last season. McCaffrey, obviously, number 1, 205. Derrick Henry, number 2, 171, so way below McCaffrey. Dalvin Cook, 163. Aaron Jones, 151. Number 3, 4, 5 on the list, Raheem Mostert, 149. Those were the only 8 weeks that he led the team in touches. And then we got Ezekiel Elliott down 16 points below him, Kenyon Drake down 17 points below him. I mean, Raheem Mostert was great once he took over, and maybe this is what we have full time. Now, I think the risk is baked into the cost. I agree. He's a bust candidate. Any running back in a Kyle Shanahan offense is a bust candidate. But where he's going in drafts, oh man, give me that kind of upside, baby.
Yeah, I honestly, the contract did help me feel a little bit better about Mostert, and I do think the risk reward is perfectly fine where you like him, Bobby. Like I have him, I think at RB26 right behind Ronald Jones. The thing is, Ronald Jones, obviously, he's going to come up on this list. Shocker. 2 rounds from now, so you're getting him I don't know if it's going to last like that after Bruce Arians' comments today, but I have no issue with Mostert at his cost, but it's just Ronald Jones is a better value for like that RB3 slot if you're looking for. But yeah, that contract, Tevin Coleman's been terrible when he's been asked to be like more than like a timeshare running back. So I'm with JJ. I don't like him as a player, and Mostert's contract signifies that they did want to keep him around, and they wanted to keep him happy. So I do feel a little bit better about him. I'll say that.
Let me ask this to you guys, since you seem to be a little bit more bullish on Mostert than I am. Does the age concern you in the late breakout?
I mean, yeah, a little bit. It always does. Like Damian Williams was one of those players too, right? Obviously, he was later in his career.
And he was being drafted in the 3rd round last year, yeah.
It pains me to know that Raheem Mostert was a Bear at one time. And, well, now we have David Montgomery. Sorry, Yates. But so that does worry me a little bit, but at the same time, it's almost like another Kenyon Drake situation too, where some guys are hidden on the depth chart, and once they get an opportunity, they make the most of it. And Mostert kind of did that. You remember it was in 2017 or 2018 when he got hurt in that game because he had to take over because there were injuries ahead of him, and he break his forearm on like a Monday Night Football game.
Yeah, I do remember that game. Was it a Mullins game?
I can't remember if it
I
was
can't
a
remember.
Mullins. I think it was actually.
Mullins, yes. I forgot
talk
all
about
about him.
Nick
He
Mullins
was
ever
so awesome when he played.
Yeah, but I think it was that game. But Mostert had played well in that short stint that he got there, and then it's like he breaks his arm, and it's like, oh, that sucks. And the guy has just so limited miles on his tires. Like Jonathan Taylor has more career carries at like 22 years old than Raheem Mostert does at 28. But it does worry me. But to know, again, I was worried a little bit more. I was more on JJ's side of this argument, but knowing they gave him that little bit extra to keep him happy and say, okay, just stop asking for a trade. We'll give you a little bit more money. That made me feel a little bit better because Tevin Coleman, even when he was healthy in the second half of the season, I think Shanahan realized that he's just not he's not a workhorse back, and he never was when he was in Atlanta either.
Right. Yeah.
All right, guys, moving on to the second half of the podcast, and there's a big drop off here. All of a sudden, when you move into the 7th, 8th, 9th round, it gets ugly quick.
How dare you say that? I think there's fantastic.
You like
things.
the 7th round? Oh,
I'm
man.
about it.
I think the ninth round is pretty ugly, but the 10th is actually better. Like there's certain rounds where I just don't like who's going where. But
right.
that's the
you either have to reach for somebody in a round afterwards, or
This is the territory where you kind of reach for players. So it's definitely tough to stick into like that 12 player range of ADP right now, but there are definitely values to be had here.
I don't know, man. I see like 6 guys on this list who are like the ultimate bust candidates, and I'm really curious if you're about to pick one, JJ.
Yeah. So round 7, I went with Kareem Hunt. Is that
okay? Good. Nope, you're safe, baby. I'll just say mine now because I know Tags is with me. Cam Akers, no chance I'm drafting him in the 7th round. Evan Ingram, Darius Geis, Drew Brees, Jared Cook, Sony Michel, just disgusting.
Yeah, it's pretty gross. That's pretty gross overall. But yeah, with Kareem Hunt, I mean, look, he averaged 12.7 PPR points per game last year when he returned. That was barely below Nick Chubb, for the record. Chubb basically gave up about 13% of the running back rush share to Hunt, but then Hunt averaged about 22% of the team's running back rushes each week when he returned. So basically, as we know, Kareem Hunt was not only a big deal to Nick Chubb when he came back last year, but he also had standalone value. Now, I will say, I don't think Kareem Hunt, and this is something that, I don't think you can just take last year's numbers and attribute them to this year, because Kareem Hunt essentially had like an 18-19% target share in that offense last season, which is not going to maintain year over year. And Nick Chubb is still going to be the lead back. But, the thing is, even when you depress that a little bit and you look at Kareem Hunt's projection overall, he still kind of comes out around ADP and around where he's being drafted. Some people might even have him a little above that in terms of projection. But then on top of that, we know that he's got the handcuff upside too. If Nick Chubb gets hurt, if something happens to Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt's a top 5 running back in fantasy football. So you have some standalone value with Kareem Hunt each week. If Nick Chubb is healthy, I would not think that Kareem Hunt's going to be have the right kind of upside that you would want in a back in this round, but he still is going to be able to meet value. And then if Nick Chubb does get hurt, he's got that top 5 value.
Tags, you picking Kareem Hunt too?
Yeah, we talked about it on a podcast the other day where I said I'd take Kareem Hunt over Devin Singletary because you might be sacrificing a little bit like higher of a floor with Devin Singletary, but you get what upside are you getting with Devin Singletary? Like you're not winning a fantasy league because you own Devin Singletary. Totally. I would rather take Kareem Hunt. So yeah, I'm definitely down with this call.
Kareem Hunt's mine too. 3 for 3, guys.
Boom.
Nice.
Tags, why don't you throw in somebody else who
he was not my pick for this round.
Oh, okay.
I am definitely on board with it. Is what I was saying.
Gotcha. Okay, so who is your pick?
So my pick here is Tyler Boyd. I mean, the guy has finished as a top 24 receiver in each of the last 2 years, and I understand AJ Green's back. And I know I'm going back to this Bengals basket.
You were all in on Joe Burrow.
I really am. I mean, I don't know if, honestly, I think you'd have to go back to Andrew Luck to find the last quarterback that came out that I felt was as pro-ready as Joe Burrow. He just operates in a certain type of calmness. He has a calmness about him. His deep ball accuracy is fantastic. Zach Taylor. So Tyler Boyd's the only one with like 16 game experience in Zach Taylor's offense, and I know that Burrow's coming in and he has no allegiance to anyone, but he's going to develop those chemistry. And Tyler Boyd saw 150 targets. I mean, in his first year in an offense, again, he was playing with there was some bad quarterback play. But when you have John Ross out there stretching the field, tilting a defense, when you have AJ Green out there demanding double coverage at times, it's like Tyler Boyd is like the forgotten man over the middle of the field. And he could essentially be, the Justin Jefferson that Joe Burrow had at LSU. He can be that player. So, if I have AJ Green as my wide receiver 2 and Tyler Boyd as my wide receiver 3, and I only use 6th and 7th round picks to get him, sign me the frick up, dude, because that means I have a top tier tight end. I have 4 running backs on my roster that are, top 5 round picks. I'm happy. I am extremely happy with that. I think you're going to be able to start AJ Green and or Tyler Boyd on a weekly basis.
So JJ, Tags and I have a bet. Joe Burrow faced Ryan Tannehill, end of the season, most fantasy points. Who's winning this?
Man, that's a great bet because those are both really good late round quarterback picks because of the rushing upside. I would probably say that Burrow has a higher ceiling, but I think Tannehill is the safer bet amongst the two. But look, Bobby, I'm giving you a 51% chance.
Yeah, baby, I'll take it. I'll take it.
I wouldn't be victory lapping that hard. But yeah, I mean, I think that's the right kind of bet to make. I dig it.
So everything you said about Kareem Hunt is spot on. I mean, if Nick Chubb was to go down, he'd be if Nick Chubb went down right now, where would you rank Kareem Hunt? Would you draft him in the first round?
Number 5 running back.
I drafted him number 5 overall over Michael Thomas.
I think you have to, yeah.
Yeah, that's how much upside the guy has, and I think he has standalone value as a solid week-to-week flex play, so he's my guy. Now, we've been through 4 rounds here, okay? We haven't mentioned a quarterback or a tight end. Now, JJ, since you're the late-round quarterback guy, can you explain why that is, why we're not drafting the Russell Wilsons and the Matt Ryans and the Drew Brees of the world?
Yeah, I mean, look, they play what I call a onesie position, where you're only starting one of them in your lineup each week. The supply and demand formula really favors you wait on that position because there's so many quarterbacks. There's a good bit of tight ends. I think that you can make an argument easily to get a tight end early versus a quarterback early. But there's so many quarterbacks and so many quarterbacks that can replace your starter throughout a season. And the other thing too is I think that the fantasy community since I started doing this, have really overstated and overrated our ability to predict which quarterbacks are going to be the best quarterbacks year in and year out. Yeah. If you look at ADP versus points scored of the 4 main positions in fantasy football, we're the worst at predicting quarterbacks in terms of how they, preseason expectation versus postseason results. They're all over the place. And that's why we see these late round quarterbacks emerge every single year. And it really comes down to the fact that the guys who are giving you a significant edge in fantasy, and really there's only 3 quarterbacks per year that are going to be plug and play. You're really getting some sort of edge from those players. I'm not sitting here saying Lamar Jackson wasn't valuable last season, even if he was a second round pick.
Right, but he was a late round pick, and so was Deshaun Watson, and so was Patrick Mahomes, and so was Matt Ryan.
Yeah, exactly. So these guys are coming out and doing something every single year. I will say, similar to wide receiver and what I said earlier, I do think that the quarterback market is finally very, very efficient, where fantasy managers are understanding the rushing component and the necessity and the importance of having that athleticism at the position. And then at the same time, and across the NFL, we're seeing quarterbacks be able to not only run the ball well, but throw the ball well too. Historically, the rushing quarterbacks have been the Cam Newtons or the Josh Allens even, where they have question marks with their arm, but we're not seeing that as much anymore because the quarterback position has just gotten that good. But yeah, so I mean, that's the main reason is you can wait. You're not getting that big of an edge from the guys who end up doing really well. And there's just a low correlation between how players perform at the beginning of the season or how we think they're going to perform and how they actually perform.
Also, I want to add in the difference between Christian McCaffrey and the number 2 fantasy back, Aaron Jones, was larger than the difference between quarterback 2, Dak Prescott, and Daniel Jones, QB 23. That's just how much the running back position matters and how little the quarterback position matters. Now, Tags, you've talked about in Boom Bust and everything in between, the article series that you do, how basically, if you don't have one of the top 3 or 4, maybe 5 in a given season quarterbacks, then you're better off just streaming the top recommended streaming quarterback every single week because when you add them all together, it's better than QB5 was last year.
Yeah, JJ basically just said it in terms of there's only 3 or 4 quarterbacks a year, and that's how it stands. Is that
and half of them are late round guys? Yeah, exactly.
I mean, did you know Patrick Mahomes last year? He was his QB1 percentage, top 12 numbers, he posted just 57% of the time.
Right.
Dak Prescott 62.5%. We know Lamar Jackson had a historical season, but JJ, you do your own podcast, and it comes down to talking about those late round quarterbacks and saying if you can correctly pick a streamer 50% of the time, just 50% of the time. That's all you have to do. in order to live up to one of those guys. That's basically what you have to do, because there's usually about 5, maybe 6 quarterbacks that'll hit above 50%. So if you can hit that mark, it's just as good as hitting on a quarterback that's drafted, in those first 4 rounds. I'm not opposed to getting someone like Patrick Mahomes or Lamar Jackson in the 3rd round. As JJ mentioned, at some point you have to stop and say, at what point did this go too far? When quarterbacks like Peyton Manning were going in the 1st round, Drew Brees, Aaron Rodgers, those guys were always going in the 1st round, and you had to choose them over like Calvin Johnson. That was dumb. But now you're choosing Patrick Mahomes against someone like maybe like an Odell Beckham, where it's like, there's some question marks, so if you want to take Patrick Mahomes at that point, I'm not opposed to it.
Yeah, and some context to that's really funny is that when I published the late round quarterback ebook way back in 2012, which please no one go look at that thing because it's so bad and outdated, and I'm almost ashamed of some of the analysis in there. But when I published it, 5 quarterbacks were being drafted in the 1st round.
Oh,
that's
no. Are you
man.
serious?
Yeah, 2012, there were 5 quarterbacks. Matthew Stafford was a 1st-round pick because it was after his big
Oh
2011 season.
my goodness.
It's wild. It's crazy.
So you single-handedly changed the entire industry. How does it feel?
Yeah, I would.
I'm just trying to, make you embarrassed a little bit. So sorry, man. Let's go to the next round here. Round 8. Who's your favorite guy, JJ?
I'm going to be a little controversial here because why not? I'm buying into Will Fuller this season.
I don't have a problem with it at this price. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So, aside from volume at wide receiver, I kind of alluded to this earlier. What you really, if you were to dumb it down, you want guys who are able to score touchdowns. And there are ways to improve that touchdown number. Like I mentioned earlier, there's end zone targets. You want guys targeted in the red zone. They have a higher rate of scoring then, which is what we see with guys like Kenny Golladay, for instance. And then you want high average depth of targets. Those are 2 ways, if you're not getting a ton of volume, that you can sort of make up for it. Will Fuller, since he entered the league, he ranks in the 91st percentile in average depth of target among all wide receivers that have seen 100-plus targets, and he ranks in the 73rd percentile in end zone targets per game. So he has that working for him. Now, I do understand that he's a very boom or bust guy. He especially was last season, but since he entered the league, he's 23rd best among all wide receivers in terms of top 12 weekly wide receiver 1 performances. He has a better rate since he entered the league at finishing as a wide receiver 1 than Amari Cooper and T.Y. Hilton. And the guys that he's behind, and this also includes guys who have played 2 years in the league, so I excluded rookies from last year. But he's really behind only studs like Antonio Brown, Steve Smith, etc.
Yeah.
And now DeAndre Hopkins is gone. That could mean potentially that Will Fuller at least has a chance to grow into a bigger role. I'm not someone who thinks that, there's all these vacated targets, therefore it's going to go to one guy. But even still, over the last 2 years, his prorated target share, and I stress prorated because we know that Will Fuller has not stayed healthy, he's gotten up to the 20% range in each of the last 2 years. So, if Will Fuller is able to stay healthy, I understand how big of an if that is. But you're paying a price where it's not that significant, where you can buy into that upside. And look, we have seen historically wide receivers with this injury-prone tag sort of turn around their careers. We saw it with Keenan Allen, for instance. That's a good example of a guy who had that tag, who was consistently, banged up and people were avoiding him. And now I'm not saying that Will Fuller and Keenan Allen are the same kind of player at all. Right. I'm just saying that, there's a lot of there's more to it than just saying this guy's injured, I'm not going to take him. So I think there's enough upside there baked into Will Fuller's cost to get him at where he's being drafted.
How about Dalvin Cook? I mean, he went from being a guy that was injury prone the first 2 years of his career, couldn't stay on the field, to a guy that's like a surefire top 5 pick.
Right. I don't know, man. He still has the shoulder things going on every other week, and some knee issues as well.
There's just a lot of there's so much narrative baked into a lot of these players when they come out. I mean, Adrian Peterson was someone who had a lot of injury concerns coming out, and even to start his career. Matthew Stafford, remember he couldn't stay healthy to start his career.
Frank Gore coming out of college. Frank Gore.
Frank freaking Gore. I mean, there's a lot of guys, and look, this is a soft tissue thing a lot for Will Fuller. I mean, there's a lot of concern. I'm not trying to brush off the fact that he's this injury prone guy. I think that he probably is in some way. But if and when Will Fuller gets hurt, at least you're getting a high wide receiver 1 hit rate if you're using him. And when he's out, you're not taking a 0 in your lineup. You're still able to throw in another wide receiver in there, and hopefully you're able to get that depth and plan around Will Fuller. Maybe get a higher floor guy around there. But I do think that he's the right kind of bet to make.
Now, Tags, we're going to skip you for a minute because my guy in this round is Brandon Cooks. And it's not because I dislike Will Fuller or because I love Brandon Cooks, but what it comes down to is we know the Texans' defense is going to be the worst it's been since Deshaun Watson came. And Deshaun Watson's really good at football. We're drafting him as the QB4 or QB5? If we're drafting Watson as the QB4 or QB5, they've got no tight end. David Johnson, he's David Johnson. And then you've got Will Fuller or Brandon Cooks. Where's he getting the fantasy points? One of these guys, maybe both of these guys, are going to outproduce their ADP. Wide receiver 36 for Brandon Cooks. Wide receiver 35 for Will Fuller. Tags, which of the two do you think it's going to be? First of all, Brandon Cooks, 1,000-yard seasons, and he's 26 years old.
Oh, I know, and he's done it with a multitude of different quarterbacks. I mean, fortunately, he played with Drew Brees, Tom Brady, and then, it goes to Jared Goff, and did fine until last year. I really can't explain what happened to him last year. Will Fuller, even last year, both of them were, not very good. I know Will Fuller had that one blow-up game that was massive, and then he also had another game where he dropped 3 touchdowns.
Yeah.
I think both of them are going in the range they should because both of them present wide receiver 2 upside. They really do. Because Will Fuller is probably, if he stays healthy, he's probably going to see 8 to 9 targets per game. He was even seeing 7 to 8 targets per game with DeAndre Hopkins in the lineup, and that's 150 targets gone. I just worry that they're kind of I don't want to say a similar player, but they're not possession style receivers. They're not go up and get it wide receivers. They're going to rely on getting open down the field and Deshaun Watson buying time. But I think they're both going in the right range. The fact that we've seen Brandon Cooks do it with different quarterbacks, it's kind of like a DeAndre Hopkins thing where these guys have performed no matter who their quarterback was. Now, again, DeAndre Hopkins played with a lot of bad quarterbacks, whereas someone like Brandon Cooks has played with some Hall of Famers, and now he goes to Deshaun Watson. So that's clearly not a downgrade from Jared Goff. It's just, you wonder if this offseason, the lack of offseason, plays into the chemistry between those two. So I am leaning towards Fuller as the better option of the two, but I also don't think that Brandon Cooks is a bad value either.
All right, Tags, who's your pick in this round?
It's Ronald Jones. Come on.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Yeah, so Bruce Arians came out today and said, Ronald Jones is our workhorse. He's the guy getting majority of the work, and the Sean McCoy is going to mix it on passing downs. And then McCoy actually came out and did an interview and said the same thing. He said, if this is Ronald Jones' team, I'm here to mentor him, to teach him, and I'm going to mix in the offense. So, it doesn't get any more clearer than that when it comes out of the head coach's mouth saying he's the guy, when it comes out of the other running back, and then Keyshawn Vaughn obviously missing camp is a big deal for someone that I didn't think he was going to overtake Jones to begin with, but there was always that chance, right? It was a non-0% chance. So Ronald Jones in the 8th round getting a starting running back that's tied to what should be a top 10 scoring offense. Yeah. And I will mention, since we haven't mentioned many quarterbacks here, if you want to wait, or let's say that you're worried because your league always takes backup quarterbacks and you're not able to stream, and if you do want a quarterback around this range, I do think that Carson Wentz is actually a solid value in terms of ADP, looking at it. Because I
agree.
ADP in expert leagues, analyst leagues, whatever, it's a lot different than it is in public leagues. But if you want to take someone like Carson Wentz in the end of the 8th round, he's a guy that's posted QB1 type numbers in at least 50% of his games over each of the last 3 years. Adding Jalen Reagor there, Miles Sanders is a good pass catcher. Ertz and Goddard are there. Deshaun Jackson, hopefully healthy. So I do like Carson Wentz. Is just I just wanted to mention him. It's not to say that he's a tremendous value at this point, but if you're waiting at quarterback, but you don't want to wait too long and you're forced to start Ben Roethlisberger or even Daniel Jones, who's got a terrible start to his schedule, I'm okay with taking Carson Wentz around here.
All right, round 9, last pick, JJ. Make it a good one. Don't go with the 49ers defense.
yeah, definitely not doing that. I'm going to go with another wide receiver. It's Marvin Jones for me.
Yeah, took my player again. I love hearing that you're on my guys.
Yeah, look, so he was averaging about 20% of the team's targets last year per game before he went down, almost 15 PPR points per game last year. He's always a bet to score a lot of touchdowns given his usage. He's seen 9, 12, 17, and 9 end zone targets over the last 4 years. He was 17th in the league last year at wide receiver and red zone targets, despite missing 2 games. And then what we saw from that Bevel offense last season was a big shift in Matthew Stafford's deep ball throwing. He threw it 26% of his attempts were 15 or more air yards, which was the highest mark in the NFL. I do think we're going to see some regression from the offense in terms of how they converted some of those throws and how efficient they were through the air. But even with that baked in, they're still going to have fairly high average at the targets. And again, it's just the kind of stuff that I look for in a wide receiver and what I want. So I think that Marvin Jones at this price, he not only has a pretty freaking good floor, but the upside is there too, given what we saw last year and given the way this offense sort of operates.
Yeah. Yep. It's Marvin Jones for me. Tex, what do you think about Marvin Jones, man?
I mean, I'm down with Marvin Jones as like a wide receiver 3-4 to have on your team.
He's going after Darius Slayton right now.
Yeah, I don't get that one. I really don't. I actually was working on something right before we started recording, and most people would like be shocked to know that over the last 2 years. So I'm not even counting Galladay's rookie year because obviously he was a rookie and he was barely playing. But the last 2 years where they've both been full-time players, Marvin Jones actually averages 7.1 targets per game when they both play, and Galladay averages 6.9.
Yep.
Galladay has a larger yards per reception, and that's why he averages it's like 16 more yards per game than Jones does. Touchdowns are close to the same. So that's there's like an 8 round difference between these two players, maybe 7. That's way too big of a gap, way too big. And you could say that Galladay's, ascending while Jones is going to start the decline of his career, but he's 30 years old. So I'd say he's still in that area that he can produce just the way he's been. Definitely dig having him as if you have him as your wide receiver 4, it's like ideal.
So who's your player, Tex?
Who's my player? My player is, I went with J.K. Dobbins here. Just because I am never, ever someone that wants to go zero running back in fantasy football. I've always advocated against that because I feel like you're relying on some injuries to happen and so many things with that. But J.K. Dobbins is a guy that Mark Ingram, he I think there was one game last year where he had more than 15 carries, just one game. They didn't really want to give him a whole lot of touches. He's not involved heavily in the passing game. He broke down as the year went on, was forced to be shut down early. J.K. Dobbins is a guy they had a first-round grade on. And if you have a first-round grade on a player, a running back, I mean, you're extremely high on him. And the Ravens front office said we were doing a disservice if we passed on him in the second round, which tells you just how high they were on him, knowing that they had Gus Edwards on the roster, who's been fine in his role. They drafted Justice Hill the year before. But Dobbins is clearly someone that's a threat to overtake Mark Ingram in this offense, which is huge. And on top of that, this year, there's going to be more absences than ever. I really do truly believe that, whether it be right or wrong. Obviously, we saw Matthew Stafford get a false positive test. He was out. Minshew, false positive test. These things happen where it's like, if that happens on game day, there's nothing they can do about it, and they're going to be sent home. So if Mark Ingram, that happens with him, he's out 2 weeks, whatever. J.K. Dobbins is going to steal that job. So Dobbins is my pick here in the 9th round. I just feel like at that point, the starting roster requirements have already been filled. You're looking for upside on your bench, and it's hard to find someone with, just as much upside as J.K. Dobbins.
So we did a really good job following the rules here this entire episode, but I can't do it any longer because I might draft Marvin Jones if he falls to the 10th round. I might draft J.K. Dobbins if he's there in the 11th round. The other 10 players here, there's no chance I'm drafting any of them. And in the 9th round, every single time, I'm not taking any chances. I'm drafting Latavius Murray in every league. So I'm cheating. I'm going Latavius Murray here.
That is cheap because I would have said Hayden Hurst as a 10th round pick.
You should have done it, man. I broke the rules, and
he was my second name on my list. Yeah, it was unfair about me. You can't do that.
Okay. Well, then my answer was Marvin Jones. But JJ, what do you think about Latavius Murray reaching this high for him?
Yeah, I mean, I dig it. My thing though is that, there is still a chance that we don't see that much Latavius Murray unless there is an injury that happens. But we know that an injury that happens to Alvin Kamara, where we saw Latavius Murray's upside last season. So it makes sense from that standpoint. A lot of the times when I'm looking at sort of these running back handcuff type players, whether it's a Tony Pollard, even Alexander Madison, even though there's a little bit of a slightly of a different situation there. I'm looking more in a best ball format with those guys where, you really need to have that crazy upside and you can't really make up for it, via the waiver wire. I know it sounds a little bit backwards, but you're really shooting for upside and finding those players. Whereas in a regular season long league, I just fear that if I were to draft Tony Pollard, let's say, he would be the first guy that I drop whenever the season starts and picks up, even though I would want to, or Latavius Murray in this case. So
I want them both.
I totally, yeah, exactly. Like I get the upside, and I especially get the upside. I think that this year is a little bit different, as Tags alluded to. I mean, I haven't traditionally been a handcuffer, but this season is a little bit different. And I'm certainly someone who, as the season wears on and one of my handcuffs are on a waiver wire, I'll pick them up, depending on where my team is at and such. But that's kind of how I view Latavius Murray and that group, is that, I worry about their standalone value. I don't know if we're going to get that standalone value. I don't know a situation where you're going to look at your roster and say, I'm going to plug in Latavius Murray this week unless there is an injury to Alvin Kamara. But I get it, because at this point in the draft, you're really, really shooting for that upside. So it makes sense.
Guys, I just saw something so weird, and I got to get your take on it. So Marquis Brown is really fast, right? He gained 23 pounds this offseason. That can't be good for a fast guy.
Well, hold on. That's a little misleading. And the reason is because he played at 170 while in college. And what happened is he had foot surgery last year, obviously, for the Lisfranc thing. And basically he lost weight during that process because you can't train like you typically would. So basically he's added 10 pounds. And for a guy his size, I don't think it's a bad thing.
Okay. He was playing at 157 pounds last year as a rookie. When I saw a fast guy added 23 pounds, I was like, I'm done. I'm not drafting Marquis Brown.
I'm just picturing the David Boston picture from like 2000. This is jacked out of his mind, Marquis Brown.
All right, JJ, that is all for today's show. Really appreciate you taking the time to come on.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me, as always.
Hey guys, give JJ a follow on Twitter if you don't already. He's at Late Round QB. I'm at Bobby Fantasy Pro, and Tags is at Mike Tagliere NFL. I've got one other thing that I need to say here, and I'm breaking down the fourth wall, so apologies here. But okay, here we go. Draft Assistant with Sync. You can find it at fantasypros.com/draftwizard. Basically, what it comes down to is you can sync your draft with your live draft. It's going to offer pick suggestions with a percentage odds that a player is going to make it. It syncs with NFL.com and ESPN. It's just like our draft simulator interface, so it's super easy to use. You can check this out at fantasypros.com/draftwizard. And in order to use the Draft Assistant with Sync, you've got to be an MVP or Hall of Fame subscriber, and you can take advantage of an offer we've got going on right now where you can get 6 months free of our Hall of Fame package, which is a $65 value in our highest subscription tier. If you want to redeem this offer, check it out at fantasypros.com/offers. For JJ Zachariason and Mike Tagliere, I'm Bobby Sylvester. Thanks for listening, and enjoy your football.